Hello, welcome back to Casablanca. This episode we're talking about When Harry Met Sally, which is a 1989 rom-com directed by Rob Reiner, written by Nora Ephron, and starring Meg Ryan, Billy Crystal, and Carrie Fisher. This is one I had actually never seen before, but it's one of those that everyone's heard of, especially the cafe scene. That's the scene that everybody knows about, but I didn't know really anything about it, except that it stars them two, and it was a love story, I guess. There were parts of this, especially like the first half, I'm like, is this a romance story? Because like they don't seem to like each other. Like they were like, oh, let's just be friends, or like we can't even be friends. And now that I've seen it, I'm like, yeah, this movie I don't think would be made nowadays. Like, it's definitely a product of its time, and I think because of how like it's seen as like a classic movie and it's so beloved by people that it's one of those that it's like, oh yeah, Harry Met Sally, yeah. And then I told a friend of mine this movie would not be made nowadays, and they were like, why? What do you mean? Like, and then I explained like the premise of it and like some of the lines that are said, and they were like, oh, I haven't seen it in a few years, I don't remember that at all. I'm like, yeah, this is basically this. It's kind of a sexist movie because it's like, yeah, guys and girls can't be friends, it's impossible because all you're thinking about is sex. And it's like, no, this is definitely a product of the 80s, because that is totally messed up. And in fact, like all of Billy Crystal's Billy Crystal's character's friends, like whenever Harry and Sally actually start being friends, all of his friends are like, what do you mean you're not sleeping with her? Isn't she attractive? Like, she's attractive, right? The only reason you wouldn't be sleeping with her is if she wasn't attractive. And it's like, wow, I actually, halfway through, I actually considered, like, maybe I don't want to cover this movie because this didn't quite age well. And I made it this far, and I was like, I'll just finish it. And yeah, like, I like the ending, like how the ending turned out. But like the themes of the movie and like what it's about and the premise behind it and the setup and everything, it's like, this, I don't really like it. I was like complaining about the movie to a friend like while I was watching it, and they were like, that movie's so nostalgic to me. I saw it like 100 times as a kid, and but she hadn't seen it in like 15 years. So she was like, at first she was trying to like get defensive, like no, that movie's great, it's a classic, what do you mean you don't like it? And then like I started explaining like the premise and the plot and some of the lines, and she was like, oh, I don't remember that. Because you're blinded by nostalgia. If I had the same like nostalgia for this as she does, I'd probably be like, oh, this movie's great, it's a classic, it's so funny. And all this, the casual sexism in this movie, like, oh man, I love it. But yeah, no, this is not, yeah. And it's especially like Billy Crystal's character, especially at the beginning when he's like, oh yeah, like, I just sleep with them, and like how I'm wondering like how long do I stay? 30 seconds? That's a little too long for me. And and she was like, I'd rather you stay till morning or the rest of my life. And then he's like, between 30 seconds and the rest of your life. That's too long. Like, oh no, this did not age well. I kind of want them to do like what they've been doing lately is like sequels. Like, many years later, like this would totally be ripe for like a sequel, because like, do they last? Because like the movie ends, I like the ending where like it is kind of like a dramatic thing when he has it like his come around moment where he seeks her out at a New Year's Eve party, and she's trying to leave, and then he shows up, and she's like, no, what are you here? This is not right, you shouldn't be here. And he's giving his, I love you, and I've always loved you, you're the one for me speech. It's like during the New Year's countdown, and it's like, that's kind of dramatic, actually. That's kind of clever, really. And so they literally start the new year as a couple. But then, like, the movie ends there. There's this theme going on. There's, like, this thing they keep going back to, kind of like a running thing, like, that begins each scene. What I really like that they do, they have, like, older couples talking about how they met. And I don't know if they were real couples or if they just had them do that for the movie, but I thought it was really cool. My favorite was this one couple where he was like, it's been 50 years and she's still as pretty as the day I met her. And she's like, yeah, and he's still just as, he hasn't changed. And I was like, okay, that was funny. And yeah, those are really funny. Those are really good. I like some of those stories. There was just one couple, I just thought they were adorable. Like, they kept talking over each other, but you could understand them. But they did it in a way where they, like, continued from what the other one was saying, so that it was like, it's not so much that they were talking over each other as that they were continuing the story from the other, and it was very interesting, and I like that one. That one was kind of funny. It's kind of cool and adorable, I guess. And it was all setting up for the end. After the New Year's Eve speech, it cuts to them, like, they're doing the little couch interview thing, and they were like, oh yeah, we got married 3 months later. And I was like, oh, that, I see what they're doing here, but it doesn't quite fit, because the other couples were like older couples. They'd been together for 30, 40, 50 years, and they were like, well, they kind of joked that they'd been together for 12 months and 12 years and 3 months, but, like, they hadn't been dating that whole time. In fact, most of it, like, it kept, at the beginning, they met up in college when they were, like, driving from college to New York, and they were, like, arguing the whole time, because, like, they were completely opposite people. Like, he was a total douche to her, and she was like, well, this isn't right, like, we can't. It's like, I just want to be friends, but you say it's impossible to be friends. And so they're fighting the whole time, and when they get to New York, they go their separate ways 5 years later, and then they run into each other and on a plane, and they kind of update each other, like, oh yeah, I remember, yeah, I'm getting married, oh wow, and I'm dating this guy, whoa. And then they go their separate ways, because, you know, we still can't be friends. 5 years later, they run into each other in a bookstore. And this time, like, it did show a change, because, like, the first two times they were, like, fighting the whole time. They met, and then they fought, and they were like, let's go our separate ways. And then they would meet 5 years later. And then the third time they met was at a bookstore, and it's like they actually grew up a little bit, because they actually, like, approached each other, like, oh, hey, I remember you, yeah, how are things? And it was like, oh, this is actually some growth between these characters. And I like what they did. I don't know how they did this, if there is, like, a makeup department, because this was before de-aging, where when it showed them, it starts off in, like, 1977, I think, and they were in college, and it shows Billy Crystal and Meg Ryan, and, like, in college, like, leaving to go to New York, and they actually looked like they were, like, 19 or 20, like, really young. And I was like, oh, because I remember, like, you know, the cafe clip. That's the only thing I knew about this movie, was that clip, and I remember what they looked like. And in fact, there's a moment during that opening scene where they're going on a cross country thing, where they go to a cafe, and I was like, oh, this happens first thing in the movie, but this isn't how I remember them looking. Is that a Mandela effect? But that wasn't that scene, obviously. And every time it jumps ahead, like 5 years, it's like, oh, they've aged them up a little bit. Yeah, okay. But then when it goes to, you know, the final time jump, it actually looks like they've aged 10 years, because it shows her, like, she's like, oh, I'm 31 now. And I was like, oh, wow. Because I don't know how they did that. If it was just makeup, because that was way before de-aging was a thing. we all know what Billy Crystal and Meg Ryan look like. They're like super famous. And then whenever I knew that they were done time jumping because they actually look like, well, they look like themselves, but then they also look like the way I remember them in that cafe scene. Which, yeah, that caffeine scene, that cafe scene, I didn't know much about it. I just knew, like, I didn't know the whole context around it. It was just a famous scene where she's like doing the thing, and then it shows a lady going, "I'll have what she's having," and I was like, that's a weird thing. And then I see the context, and I was like, oh, okay, that makes sense. It also makes it funnier, because, yeah. Also, a little fun fact I learned while doing some research for this: the lady that said, "I'll have what she's having," the director is named Rob Reiner. He's very famous. He did like Princess Bride and like a whole bunch of other famous movies. And that was his mother. Which, yeah, that was a little... I just assumed she was just some random person. Nope, director's mother. Speaking of the crew, Nora Ephron, she was the writer of this film. And my sister and I, whenever I told her I was watching this, she was like, oh yeah, that movie always kind of makes me think of like Sleepless in Seattle and You've Got Mail, and all those 90s rom-coms. And I was like, oh yeah. And she started listing off some of them. And when I was doing some research, like compiling notes for this, I looked up Nora Ephron to see, because unfortunately she passed away in 2012, but she has a long filmography of films that she wrote. And guess what she wrote? Other than this, Sleepless in Seattle and You've Got Mail, which when I told her that, I was like, that makes sense, and it explains a lot. And she was like, yes, it does. That's why they kind of feel similar. It's like they're their own complete unique thing, but they have a similar feel, and now we know why. It has the same writer. She's a very good writer. And like, I haven't seen most of the movies on there, but like I showed her like the list. I'm like, hey, here's some of her other movies. Like, oh, I've seen all of those. Those are amazing. I'm like, yeah. I'm not surprised. I think my favorite character in this movie was actually Sally's best friend, Marie. She was played by Carrie Fisher. And Carrie Fisher just has this way about her where, like, I think this character was basically... I don't want to say, like, oh, this is Carrie Fisher. This is, she's playing herself. Because, like I've seen her in interviews and stuff. Like, I think we all have. So, like, we all know, like, how she is, who she is. So, like, this was more her than, like, other roles I've seen her in, which is, admittedly, I've pretty much only seen her as Leia. I've seen her in other movies, obviously. But, like, I haven't seen, like, every Carrie Fisher movie, but this is more what I'm used to when I think of Carrie Fisher, when I see like interviews and stuff, where I just really like the character, and I don't know if it's because like I know like who Carrie Fisher is and how she is and the type of person she was. But yeah, it's like this is my favorite character. She's so funny. But yeah, now that I've seen this movie, it's like, I can kind of see why it was such a big deal when it came out. But, like, I think it's mostly nostalgia that keeps people coming back to it. Because, like, I don't know if I'll ever watch it. I also found out that cafe that they ate at, where that scene happened, I forgot the name of it. I didn't write down the name. But it's still open, still running. And that table where that happened, they have a sign over it saying... It says, "This is where Harry met Sally. Hope you'll have what she's having." Which, now that I know the context, I'm like, I wouldn't have put that on the sign. I don't really have a whole lot to say about this movie. A lot of it was kind of... It felt cringy because of it didn't age well, in my opinion. I think a part of it was, like, I didn't grow up with it. So my friend I should have had her on as a guest. Like, hey, you want to be a guest? Because, like, you could probably go on and on and on about this movie. And I'm just like, yeah, this movie I don't like this movie. Especially, like, this heavy focus on, like, gender roles and stuff. And it's like, this is this probably, it would have fit in right well in like the 80s, but like nowadays it's like, yeah, no. There's a scene where like Sally, she's dating this guy named Joe, I think, and she's like, do you have any women friends? And he's like, well, no, I don't. I actually don't. And he's like, but I will make one just to make you happy. And I was like, seriously? Like, are your friend? Was that a thing back then? Or like, it's like every scene, like everyone's having a conversation about like gender roles and the norms and, you know, sleeping with everybody else. And it's like, is this how people talked back then? Was this normal? I don't know. 'Cause I was born in 88. So like, actually this movie, I think the New Year's party they were at was New Year's 1988. So, yeah. I definitely wouldn't remember that because I wasn't even born. I was born a few months after that Halloween party. I mean, that New Year's Eve party. Like, in the movie. Like, they might have filmed it in the 1987. I don't know when it was filmed. Anyway, yeah, this is... Oh, I was going to say, this is a short episode, but then I actually looked at the recording app, and I've been recording for a lot longer than I thought I was. I was like, I've only been recording for 5 minutes, so it's a really short episode, but nope. Anyway, I'm going to end the episode here.